there's a lot of storm chasers out there. Everybody wants to know, like, how did this happen for you? How did you grow up to be a storm chaser?
It's definitely, I think the hardcore storm chasers, like the folks who are really into it. And I used to say the guys who are really into it, but it is changing now. You see more women in the field. But I think the folks who are really hardcore, who are really doing this like full time as their life, it is something you're born with. There's some kind of mental imbalance, because as far back as I could go, as far back as I could remember, I'd just get excited by violent weather, thunder, lightning, the house shaking from wind. It was like a drug. I felt it really early on. And then what happened was, as soon as I was old enough to go out on my own to go to where the weather was going, I started doing it. And this was before the internet, before I knew that was called storm chasing. I didn't know there was a name for it. I just started doing it. So that's how it started. But yeah, it's not a hobby you take up later in life. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to start like learning pottery. It's like, you're kind of born with the urge.
Okay. So in storm chasing, I see it as like an art and a science, because you have to know where to chase, what to do, find the right spot, but you're also shooting this and getting footage. So tell me about acquiring both of those skills.
It is, I'm glad you said that. Storm chasing, I feel like it's a weird mix of many. You're a photojournalist, you're a scientist, you're kind of an artist, because I always feel like every video I put out is like releasing a single. A hurricane season is like an album. Some of your videos do great, some bomb. It's very much like an artist's life. So it's like all those things together. In terms of hunting down the storm, I would say it's partly science. It's partly kind of understanding the computer models, the biases of each and everything else. There's a little bit of history mixed in. A lot of my decisions as a chaser, when I'm deciding, okay, if I want to go for this storm or not go, or which way I want to go, a lot of it is driven by climatology. I know the history. I'm a walking almanac of the history of, hurricanes in Texas, of hurricanes in Mississippi, of typhoons in Japan. I know what's happened in the past, and that will, the past is future. So I will the climatology, the history will drive my choices. And then I'll say there's also, it's kind of like a sixth sense. There's just something like you're just looking at it on the satellite image or the radar loop, and you're just getting a feel, and you don't know why, that here's where it's going. So it's a mixture of all those things, I would say. It's a weird kind of like, it's a sort of like alchemy.
The instinct thing. Is this how you wound up in Marsh Harbor in the eye of Category 5 hurricane for like 24 hours? Tell me about Dorian and how that played out.
As a chaser, you spend your whole life fantasizing about that perfect chase, the extreme high-end hurricane that's at the top of the intensity scale, and you're on an isolated island so you could perfectly observe it, and it's daytime so you could see it. Dorian was all that. It was the kind of chaser's fantasy come true. And I don't want to be insensitive. It was a tragedy, but from a meteorological perspective, witnessing it was just something incredible to behold. And it was a weird instinct that brought me there. It was supposed to hit the east coast of Florida, and then the computer model started to shift, like, okay, it's not going to hit Florida. It's going to kind of recurve, move parallel to the coast. And I was not fond of the idea of going out to the islands, the Bahamian Islands. I call it island roulette. I hate chasing tropical cyclones on islands. I hate it, because you have to pick an island, and half the time you'll be wrong, and you're stuck on that island by the time the hurricane is close enough, so you can't relocate. It's a sport that I don't like. But with that one, something told me, just do it. And I got on the very last flight onto Great Abaco Island, which, by the way, is just off of Florida. It's only like 100 miles. It's really close. But what's really interesting is it's only 100 miles or so, but you make that jump to that island, and you feel like you're on the other side of the earth, because just culturally and architecturally, it's so different. And I'm there. It's the last flight to land. Airport closes down. Hurricane rapidly intensifies as it approaches the island. And I had this feeling of looking over the side of a cliff. I just thought, whoa, man, here we go. It was hardcore.
But I mean, yes, a thrill of a lifetime for a storm chaser. At any point were you like, oh crap, what did I do? Am I going to be in huge trouble here personally?
I was originally going to ride out the hurricane in like a sturdy condo building on the second floor, and like right on the waterfront. And then as it bombed out and became a, Category 5, and then a strong Category 5, I was like, ugh. I just like a feeling in my stomach. People think storm chasers are so fearless. I kind of am, but I also have common sense, and that common sense created fear, which is a good thing because that's a survival instinct.
Yeah, for a reason.
The Darwin thing. And I'm like, all right, I need to relocate. So at the very last second, I relocated. I went into town and I found I found a school on a hill. So I was high enough to protect me from storm surge. And it was a school. It was sort of like a designated shelter, which I never do that. But I was like, okay, I think I'm going to ride it out here. So that's where I was. At a certain point, the hurricane started to started to come in. The wind started to really rip. And the sort of folks managing the facility were like, everyone had to get inside, and they locked us down. And normally I wouldn't be cool with that. I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to leave because I don't want to disobey them, but I don't want to be like stuck here. But the hurricane was so hardcore. It was coming in with 180-mile-an-hour winds. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do that. So I ended up in a classroom. It's a little tiny concrete building because the school was a campus of little buildings, and this little tiny classroom with like 11 other people. And the core of the hurricane passed over us. On the downwind side of the classroom, the side facing away from the wind, we're looking through the cracks in the cyclone shutters. Everything just turned white. It was like being inside a washing machine. Like you could not see anything. When we got into this 180-mile-an-hour winds, you felt it. The concrete walls vibrating, the roaring, but like just literally 20 feet away, you couldn't see the cars that were parked. It was just like a curtain. It was like I might as well have been filming a shower curtain. And the pressure in your ears was painful with the gusts hitting the building. Finally, the shutters on the other side of the room started to cave in. So all the men in the room were pressing furniture against those shutters. And then I noticed when the wind speed maxed out, sunlight started to come through the shutters. It started to get bright and sunny outside, even though we were in full-on hurricane winds because we were getting into the eye. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. And then we went outside and saw the eye.
How long did that last?
The eye lasted, oh gosh, it was maybe an hour and a half. So we walked outside and it was just apocalyptic. And it was like that white curtain of craziness lifted and you could see half the cars had blown away. My car was there, the one next to mine. I don't know what happened to it, just blew away. Other cars were ripped open from the force of the wind. Parts of the buildings, the schools have collapsed. The trees just looked like sticks. It was unbelievable. And then the stadium eye above us. Now, the bad thing was the building was so compromised, we couldn't ride out we knew the backside of the hurricane was coming, couldn't ride it out there. So we had to figure out what to do. There were 11 of us. A couple of the folks in the room, their cars were destroyed. Mine was one that survived. So of the three of us who had cars that still worked, we could fit the 11 of us into the 3 cars, and we kind of caravan down the highway. Now, the scary thing is we had no radar or anything, so we didn't know when that backside was going to come in. And this is a kind of hurricane where the air is filled with flying wreckage, stuff that'll, I don't want to be graphic, but it'll take your head off without you even knowing what hit you. Yeah. So it was scary. We got on the highway and had to find somewhere else to go before the backside of the hurricane hit. We found a big government building and we all just crammed in just as the backside came in and the winds just went back up over 150 miles an hour.
Let's back up and go back to storm chasing. And I've noticed there's like different personalities of storm chasers. We've kind of hinted at what kind you are, adrenaline junkie. Yeah. But what are the different types of storm chasers and what do you think they all bring to the weather community?
It's a great point. We all have our own styles, I mean, absolutely. It comes down to you watch how we tweet, how we tell the story, how we make the videos and everything else. We've all got our different vibes. And you know what? That's what makes it cool because think about it. It's like you don't want all musicians to sound the same. You want the different styles and everything else. You look at someone like Reed Timmer, he's like when he's like deep in a storm, he's like shouting and intense and passionate. And that's like the Reed style. Mine is I'm very into narration, but then when the storm starts to hit, I don't say anything because I want you to hear the hurricane. They're both great styles. People like both. They're just different ways of kind of showing the storm and kind of telling the story. Some of us like the long form videos. Some of us like the short ones. Some of us like to really emphasize the science more. Some of us are more into telling the kind of like the human interest angle, talking with survivors afterward. Everyone's kind of brings a different angle to it. And that's, I think, like, again, what makes it interesting because I think when you put it all together, you get a lot of cool angles on one storm.
Was there anything in your past that kind of prompted you to be like always chasing something like this? You can say, I don't want to answer.
No. I'll share. All. I'm all into sharing. No. I grew up in no childhood trauma. We had a couple of hurricanes when I was growing up. I grew up on the Long Island, like a suburban island right next to New York City. So we had a couple of hurricanes, but they weren't the kind that like my town wasn't destroyed, but they were ones that made an impression on me. But no, I grew up in like a super, kind of like one of those kind of perfect childhood, nice parents. My mom was like a really nice housewife and my dad came home every day at 6 and, just a nice suburban town, like really boring nice. So that's how I grew up. So no childhood trauma. So the obsession with weather, which I do think gets actually very toxic and unhealthy. It has like the obsession and the will to chase, like for whatever reason, it has an addictive quality. And I've noticed it has an addictive pattern in the sense that especially late in the hurricane season, I'll just be burned out and tired. And there's another hurricane or a typhoon on the other side of the earth. And I'm literally like, oh my God, like I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And there's something in me that's like, you're going to go. It's like a drug addiction. And it's a very, I'll just be honest, it's a toxic lifestyle because it gets very unhealthy. The days leading up to a chase. And when you're on the chase, at least for me, I'm very I'm focused, kind of like I treat it like I'm a competitive athlete, and it's like, I'm on the hunt. I'm not eating as much as I should. I'm not sleeping as much as I should. I'm just focused on, the ball, in this case, the eye of the storm, getting in it. And days of that are unhealthy and also 15-hour flights and not sleeping and all-nighters and all that and just eating crap on the road because you're not getting square meals. Sleeping in the car wet, all those things that you do, it's toxic. And, at the end of the season, usually I'm a little bit of like a mess and I have to that's time to kind of just, regroup, kind of get that time to kind of almost like detox, I mean, is a way to put it. But I think that's necessary because here's the deal. If you want to be if you want to be a top storm chaser and you really like one of the top people that's really like going for it and getting those big storms, like the legendary storms, it requires that extra motivation, that extra, because it's like it's unpleasant. So you need something to drive you to want to go to the other side of the earth, to some place that you don't know, where you don't know anyone, and you're going to have a lot of physical discomfort, a lot of uncertainty. Something's got to drive you to want to do that, to overcome all those obstacles, to get inside the storm. So it's almost like if you're not addicted, you're not going to push yourself like that.
You mentioned storytelling several times, but it's not just the storytelling. There's actual science data gathering going on too, right? So tell me a little bit about how we currently get data and where the holes are and how storm chasers are filling that gap.
I'm glad you asked about this because I've evolved over the years. So when I started chasing, I was just an adrenaline junkie. It was all about just being in the storm. And like, I noticed that the storms that scared me were the ones I was like really into. It's kind of like the same reason people go on roller coasters, like they kind of want that fear. That's what it was initially. It was like kind of getting to the edge of the cliff and looking over it and experiencing that feeling. But over the years, it's actually evolved a little bit. What I noticed was when hurricanes hit the U.S., there's a lot of like weather stations and we have recon flights going into them. They're well documented. There's usually a lot of data. In other parts of the world, like in parts of the Philippines, parts of Mexico, these storms come ashore a lot of times in places without much population density, without weather stations. So all we know about these events, these impacts, are basically what we could tell from satellite imagery, which is not a lot. So I realized, okay, if I'm going to the far corners of the earth and I'm going to be in these storms anyway, I might as well start measuring these events. So, I got a fleet of instruments, like portable instruments, and I started like measuring air pressure, and I've turned it into a whole operation where I'll plant them along the coast where I think the hurricane's going to come ashore. So I'm getting kind of like a 3-dimensional data profile of what's happening. And the satisfying thing is, I'm not a scientist. I studied history in college. I'm like, I have a Bachelor of Arts. So I learned how to collect quality controlled data, with properly calibrated instruments. And that stuff is gold to scientists who want to know what happened at the surface as a hurricane came in. So the big satisfying thing for me is a lot of times, I'm collecting data in events that otherwise there are no other data except for what I collect. And it gives the scientist that kind of missing puzzle piece to understand what happened in that event. So I always say I'm not the scientist, I'm the scientist hunting dog.
Which scientists, how are you getting this to people? Like, how is this being used?
So after each chase, I do a technical report that shows the data that I collected, that graphs it, and then that kind of analyzes it, that shows like, okay, where the peak pressure gradients are, and that infers things about the storm and its structure and the time of impact and everything else based on those data. There's just a lot you can tell just from air pressure data and video. You can make all kinds of inferences about the storm, when it hit, the structure, etc. I put all that in a report. I send it to the National Hurricane Center and to any other scientists who are interested, and then they will review that report. And then a lot of times, especially in landfall events where there's not a lot of other data, they will then use my data to come up with so what they do is to do their post-analysis, to kind of, it's sort of like an autopsy afterward. They look at an event and they try to sort of piece together exactly what happened for the final report.
A few rapid fire questions here. How many storms have you chased?
Okay, so I have been in the inner cores or the eye walls of 80 hurricanes and typhoons, and that's a world record. No one, dead or alive, has been in that many on the ground. And I say on the ground because the folks flying the planes into the hurricanes, I think some of them might have more, but in terms of on the ground, no one dead or alive has been in that many. And that's 80 and counting.
Scariest situation you've been in?
I would say it's a tie between Hurricane Dorian and Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. Category 5. Hit the city I was in directly. The whole city went underwater. At the height of the storm, I actually threw my camera down and was jumping in the water to pull people out. Thank God no one in our hotel died. We got everybody to the second floor, seniors, children, disabled people. Literally, we're carrying a guy up the steps in a wheelchair. And I was very proud that no one in the hotel died, because in the city, many thousands died.
Okay, that may answer my next question. Farthest you've ever traveled for one?
Queensland, Australia, which is even further than East Asia. I would say the farthest places I generally chase are Philippines, Taiwan, and Australia.
Do you ever get confused because they're spinning the wrong way?
That definitely throws you off. When you chase in Australia, two problems. One, the cyclones, that's what they call them down there, cyclones. The cyclones turn the wrong way, and also you're driving on the other side. You're driving on the left, which takes you a good day or two to get used to. So between those two things, it is very confusing being down there.
All right, any funny or unexpected moments in your time chasing?
I used to be very secretive about my chasing. I was kind of in the closet about it, and I was just kind of like, didn't tell anyone that I did it. My parents were just, they were beyond being upset about it. They just sort of developed emotional scar tissue and just didn't care anymore. But what happened is one day, I was in a typhoon and rescuing people. That footage got on TV, and a client of mine for some consulting work I do was like, why were you in the Philippines and why were you rescuing people? Like, what was that? Because I had no idea that I did any of this. They just thought I was some consultant, and they didn't know why I was in the Philippines and why I was pulling people out of water. So that was when that kind of blew the lid off my secret. And that's when I started to just be like, all right, I have to be open about this. And people who know me need to know the truth that, like, yeah, I've got this other life.
All right, so just tropical cyclones, or do you chase any other types of weather?
I am proudly narrowly specialized. I only chase hurricanes, and as I always say, I'm faithful to hurricanes, and I don't sleep around. I don't chase anything else. It's just like, and I'm not gonna, and I am very proudly and narrowly specialized, and I don't apologize about it.
Okay, I was gonna ask you what you do in the off season, but you're traveling the world. Is there an off season?
I chase all around the world, and when it's not hurricane season here, it's hurricane season in the Southern Hemisphere. But that actually, our winter, their hurricane season, it ends up basically being an off season because there aren't as many chaseable storms down there. So usually during our winter, it is a chance for me to kind of catch up, edit my videos, get caught up on my reports, do some speaking appearances and stuff like that. So yeah, this is the end of my rest up time because I'm getting ready for the new season.
Awesome. Josh, is there anything else you want to add?
No, just it's great to talk to you, Emily, and I'm glad to share this.